Grace and peace to you this afternoon in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I am happy to be with you and quite blessed to have this opportunity to share with you a proposal that is coming to the General Conference in May from the Connectional Table. Again, Kenitha Begum Sai, Chief Connectional Ministries Officer of the CT, and I am joined by my fellow CT colleague, Barbara Borgegrain. As you all know, the General Secretaries as well as the presidents of the agencies are all part of the Connectional Table. So I'll allow her a moment to introduce herself.
Greetings, good people. I'm Barbara Borgegrain, lifelong United Methodist, preacher's kid, and desperately trying to make sure that everyone in our pension plans gets a pension wherever you go.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, what does the Connectional Table do? Our purpose is to discern and articulate the vision for our worldwide church, to steward the mission, ministries, and resources of the denomination in line with the dictates of General Conference and in consultation with the Council of Bishops. As you see in this paragraph excerpt on the screen, the Connectional Table is where money and mission come together to steward the resources, mission, and ministry of the denomination. We have been working on a piece of legislation having to do with the U.S. as a regional conference. And I want to remind you, this month we have celebrated Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And if you remember King preaching about a great dream that he had, I believe that United Methodists also have a dream, and it is articulated in paragraph 125 of our Book of Discipline. It's a dream for a worldwide connection. It says, integrally holding connectional unity and local freedom, we seek to proclaim and embody the gospel in ways responsible to our specific cultural and social contexts while maintaining a vital web of interactive relationships. The legislation that I am going to talk to you about in these few moments is about maintaining that vital web of interactive relationships while we do ministry that is specific to our own cultural context. So we are proposing creating a U.S. regional conference. What is that? It is a conference that would comprise the current U.S. jurisdictions and geographical boundaries congruent to the U.S. annual conferences. The U.S. regional conference legislation does not change the role or function of jurisdictional conferences, including the election of bishops. Why call it a regional conference? Now, as many of you who have been around for a while know, we have talked for many years about the U.S. as a central conference. However, naming this new structure for U.S. governance a regional conference rather than a central conference gets us away from that painful history of racism in our church in which we created the central jurisdiction for the purpose of segregating the church. The goal of having this type of contextual U.S. governance is to unburden the General Conference from petitions that are U.S. specific and to create parity between the United States and the central conferences in being able to adaptable parts of the Book of Discipline. We are also anticipating that having the U.S. as a regional conference, a place for doing U.S.-specific governance, can move U.S.-centric matters out of the General Conference. And I'm going to let Barbara tell you a little bit more about that.
So why is this needed? Well, significant portions of what is in our current Book of Discipline is rooted in a time when the United Methodist Church, or its predecessor denominations, were mostly US-centric, mostly national. So many petitions that come to General Conference pertain largely to US only or entirely to US only matters. Further, unlike the central conferences, no venue other than the General Conference exists for US-specific legislation to be discussed. So you might ask, but we've operated like this for a long time. Why do we need to change now? Because it isn't really that much legislation. But the fact is, it is a lot of legislation, and the number of Central Conference delegates is growing as a proportion of the overall General Conference. So they're spending more and more time on things that really don't pertain to them. One of those is, of course, the US-based clergy plans. Those are incorporated by reference into the Book of Discipline, which means that all of you as delegates have the pleasure of reading 150 pages of legal documents for the upcoming Compass Plan, which has been submitted to the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate so that it can be voted on, and then if approved, incorporated by reference into the Book of Discipline. That also means every time we want to amend the plan and we try to make sure it's updated and completely consistent with US laws and taxation requirements, we have only one chance every 4 years, and again, that's the General Conference. So we have 26 petitions coming to this next General Conference. So we also, in addition to US law and taxes, have to then, of course, coordinate with US Social Security. So it's not just the pension plans, however. We were looking through the 2016 Advanced Daily Christian Advocate to see how many other things are really US only, and I've just put up here a few examples, but we found pretty quickly over 50 petitions that were really US only. So I will not go through all of these, but a couple examples of Book of Discipline paragraph changes are things like regarding the UN Development Fund, which makes loans only in the United States, or skipping down regarding the jurisdictional young people's ministries, or continuing Native American Comprehensive Plan, which applies in the US, or strengthening the Black church for the 21st century. Also, resolutions. There was a number of resolutions that, again, are US only. That includes environmental racism in the US, or affirming use of diverse languages in the US, or United States public education and the church, or voting representation for people in the District of Columbia. I won't keep going on, but there are an awful lot of petitions that our Central Conference brothers and sisters have to wade through, try to understand, and then vote on within the General Conference. As I mentioned, this is getting to be more and more urgent because we are a changing church and we need to adapt. Just back in 1996, only 15% of the delegates were from Central Conferences, but going into this next General Conference, it'll be 44%, and we project, if we just project that out, it gets to 61% in just 12 years. So more and more, we need a chance to discuss what is pertinent to the whole and let the regional areas work with things that are specific only to them. We think this is important because it's more efficient. It allows the US church to deal with its stuff while not taking the time of others. We think it is consistent with Central Conference decision-making opportunities right now. For instance, for pensions, Central Conference's annual conferences each have their own pension, and they make decisions about those pensions that best align with their conference needs. We think it's more fair because it doesn't burden the Central Conference delegates with all of the US stuff. And we also think it still preserves what is most important. The non-adaptable portions of the Book of Discipline will still be at the, in front of the whole General Conference to decide. Kenitha?
Thank you, Barbara. There is a long history to this, as many of you know. The Connectional Table has been working on this since 2013. We have been working on this separate from the outcome of the 2019 special session, and as Barbara highlighted, there are issues well beyond our impasse that has gotten us to this place of stuckness that will be impacted by this legislation. This has been a collaborative process throughout. As you can see, we have worked closely with 1pass6 and with their legal counsel, trying to make sure that what we are doing is consistent with what is happening with our pension plans. We have talked about this legislation with our directors of connectional ministries around the U.S. We have talked to conference chancellors about this. We have talked with the Council of Bishops about this legislation, and indeed our Central Conference College of Bishops this past November endorsed this proposal. In addition, we have worked quite closely with the Commission on the General Conference, in particular with the Rules Committee, around how the different stages of this legislation will work. So let's talk a little bit about the stages. This is happening, the legislation will happen in 2 stages. The first stage will create a U.S. regional committee. This will be a petition that does not require constitutional amendments. The U.S. Regional Committee will function as both a contingency and an interim. In other words, before a U.S. Regional Conference actually becomes a reality in 2024, the U.S. Regional Committee will be operative. Once we have a U.S. Regional Conference, the U.S. Regional Committee can go away, basically. The U.S. Regional Committee will be comprised of all of the elected delegates from the U.S., as well as 1 layperson and 1 clergy person elected from each of the central conferences. The committee will have legislative function and will be able to consider petitions that are judged to be U.S. specific and U.S. adaptable. Again, in this legislation, we're dealing with parts of the discipline that can be adapted. The committee would process that kind of legislation, and then all legislation processed and approved by the U.S. Regional Committee would go back to the General Conference.
So then, stage 2 would also be taken as a petition, as part of the petition to this general conference. One of the reasons we did that is so you could see the whole picture. What do both stages 1 and 2 look like, and not have to wonder what come next. But stage 2 would then create a U.S. regional conference to convene following General Conference 2024. Again, it would include the U.S. jurisdictions, and they would continue with the same powers and duties that they currently have. But stage 2 requires constitutional amendments. It amends 2 paragraphs and adds 4 paragraphs to the Book of Discipline. So if this is approved at General Conference 20, it would then need to go forward for annual conference ratification and would be going through that process over the next 2 years. If it is approved, then it would go into effect in 2024, and as Kenitha mentioned, the stage 1 regional committee would cease to exist. If it is not ratified, then the stage 1 regional committee continues until the General Conference decides to do something else. And so now Kenitha will say how this relates to other proposals.
You have already heard about a number of other proposals that are being offered at this General Conference. The CT proposal is not a plan for restructuring the whole church. It was an effort that we embarked upon as a connectional table, again, that was separate from the impasse that we hit in 2019 and designed to deal with a number of issues related to our global nature and related to the feedback that we have heard consistently from our Central Conference delegates. The legislation is not dependent upon any other proposal. Now, in particular, the protocol, which we have just heard about, envisions some sort of regional autonomy or some sort of regionalization that might be like the connectional table plan, and we are certainly in conversation with other groups. However, again, the CT legislation stands on its own in two stages: first, a U.S. regional committee, and then eventually a U.S. regional conference, where the U.S. will have the ability to adapt and supplement the Book of Discipline according to its own context. There is more information available at this URL, the bit.ly USRC legislation. You will also find it on 1pass website. And if you step out at a table right outside the hallway, you'll see material like this legislative overview booklet. And you'll see in your packets, you should have gotten a little bag with the connectional table on the outside of it, and you'll see little cards like this that again has the web link as well as more detailed information. And of course, we will be available for questions throughout this pre-general conference briefing. I encourage you to take a look at what is on the website. It has been the legislation as well as the educational materials have been translated in all of the official languages of the General Conference. In addition to, I believe there is a particular Swahili that we did an extra one, and then Tagalog. There's a Tagalog translation there as well. So we've tried to make this as accessible to the body as possible. Thank you very much, and blessings as we all discern how we will go forward in a new way as a denomination. Thank you.
Thank you.